Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week, what happened in the economy, the stock market. We had two huge earthquakes in Turkey. We have the internet going out in Italy. We also have another eggplant, this time in New Zealand, that's going up in flames, and the almighty predictable collapse of the US dollar. Let's go ahead and get started. We had this week overall, the kind of overarching idea was the fact that we had a lot of speakers from the Fed, which is the central bank of the United States, talking about continuing to increase the interest rates in order to try to quash the inflation. So remember, it's good that they're quashing the inflation because it's like a self-tax, right? It's, you can see it in the grocery store compared to last year or 2 years ago. I'll just kind of repeat this story again. When I went to Five Guys during the pandemic, 2020, probably July, August, something like that, 2 burgers, 2 drinks, 2 fries, we're talking about $20, max 24. Now, when I went recently, literally a week ago, so we're talking about 2 years later, it was $20 just for me. So it's literally been a 100, more than that, right? Probably more like 200. But 100% or so increase in the cost of what it costs to eat. So now you are going to the grocery store and you're paying double what you used to pay before, right? But your income isn't going up the same amount. See how it works? So that was the main thing. That caused a lot of the stocks to go down, especially the NASDAQ, which went down over 2%. Canada also was negative. We have some really freaky weather going on as well. If you guys remember 2020, that video I did in December, I talked about how I think the next 10 years, or this kind of 2020s decade, is going to be a lot of social problems, a lot of economic problems, a lot of environmental problems. And we had the lowest temperature ever recorded in Boston since 1881, and new records there for record cold as well in Boston. And we had another place that recorded the coldest ever with wind chill in all of the United States. It was negative 109 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 80 degrees Celsius. That was in the Mount Washington Observatory in northeastern United States. You guys can look it up on Google Maps. So it was as cold as Mars there. So in addition to that, the overseas market news, the Euro stocks are mostly lower as well. Istanbul went down almost 11%, mainly due to the situation with the earthquakes. I'll share that here in just a moment. Latin America was mixed. The Bovespa went down 0.41%. The biggest loser in Latin America was the Merval in the Great Socialist Republic of Argentina. In Middle East and Africa, Egypt was the biggest winner there at over 8%. And then in the far, far east, mostly lower the markets, the Hang Seng in Hong Kong was down over 2%. Not a whole lot of news in the crypto space and Bitcoin, even though a lot of the cryptos are holding their gains. I still prefer my favorite garbage coin of all. I love that video. Crypto theft reached a record $3.8 billion in 2022 due to mainly, supposedly, the North Korean hackers. And then if you guys remember, the bankrupt company, the exchange Genesis, is doing a restructuring. And because of that plan, they're going to be able to recover 80% of the money that their customers lost. Remember that Coinbase and all the other companies, the money that you have in the exchange, if they go bankrupt, they literally have said, they changed Coinbase, which is the largest crypto exchange in all of the US, changed their terms of service to say that if they go bankrupt, you lose your money. It's not your money anymore. It's the company's money to cover the bankruptcy. So keep that in mind when you're investing in crypto. Coinbase did fall over 14%. They're just a hair under $60 now after the CEO, Brian Armstrong, saying that the SEC, which is the regulatory body in the United States, may want to get rid of crypto staking for retail customers. So it's going to leave it for the rich guys, but not you and I. And if you guys don't know what staking is, if you have Bitcoin or any other kind of crypto, you can literally lend it out and they'll pay you interest on it. Now, Coinbase had $62 million in revenue from blockchain rewards, including staking. In Q3, 10% was the staking. So, I don't understand why they want to do this because it's such a big portion of their overall revenue, but I guess they're trying to go institutional. They always make these rules so you and I can't take the same advantage as the bigger guys, right? Bitcoin overall lower for the week, went down over 6% to 23,305 and change. And commodities and the conspiracy theory news for the week. You guys know that we've had this situation with the prices of eggs almost more than doubling in 2022, which was last year, due to the quote unquote avian flu. You're right. And other factors. They have dropped over 50% in the last recent weeks. And in no conspiracy news available, the third largest eggplant burst up in flames. I think it was 75,000 hens that were, what's the nice way to say it, that died in the fire. Well, now in New Zealand, the largest egg farm killed 75,000 hens amid their national shortage as well. And one of the really peculiar things is that there was a report that came out that found that eggs actually block the spike protein from the pandemic virus, starting with C and then ending with Ovid, so I don't get my account banned. So I find it very peculiar. Obviously, they wouldn't be doing this on purpose, because there would be no way. But what if they were trying to block that so that you could go and get more, things in your arm, right? So they can sell you more things rather than you trying to do it the natural way. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. Don't want to start a hit piece in the comments, but you see what I mean? I just don't think that's a coincidence. Global gas and oil industry reached historic gains. Altogether, they had $195 billion in profits in 2022, 120% more than 2021. ExxonMobil, which was the biggest player, netted $56 billion for the year. It's the highest amount in the 152-year-old history, and 1.5 times 2021. Russia's in a bit of a pickle since they're trying to institute new price caps and sanctions on Russia. They have cut their oil production by 500,000 barrels a day, or about 5%, to be able to get back at the United States and Europe from trying to put a price cap on the oil. On the gasoline. And they are facing new sanctions, which is a big problem for Russia, because now that the economy isn't booming anymore, that oil prices are coming down. For example, this week they came down, that they're going to have a problem with their deficit and their budget, right? Especially since they have to increase the budget now due to the situation in Ukraine, because they have to finance the war. One of the unusual is not the right word. One of the interesting things on the reports that came out this week was that the sanctions in Russia are really not working, due to the fact that the Russians are just selling the oil to India, and then they're refining it into diesel, gasoline, and jet fuel, and then exporting it to the USA and Canada. So literally they just sidestep completely. If you guys remember when they first instituted the sanctions, I think the US was still buying 13% of its oil or something from Russia. So it's like just a big theater. You see what I mean? Supply concerns did affect the demand for oil. That's part of the reason, oil did go up this week, not down, as I just mentioned. And in the confidence for the increasing demand from China, U.S. crude went up over 8% to 79.72, while Brent went up over 8% to 86.39. U.S. is now going to impose also a 200% tariff on aluminum from Russia, so they can sell Russia can sell the aluminum to India, and then they can just import it without a tariff. And there's a Swiss commodity trader called Trafigura Group, which is facing a $500 million loss after discovering that metal cargoes that they ordered with nickel didn't have the nickel that they ordered. So now there's a bunch of lawsuits with an Indian businessman to try to get it fixed. Overall for the week, precious metals, gold is up 0.06% to 1866. Silver's down 1.49% to 2208. And in financial and banking news, speaking of cargo, with the worsening situation for the consumers, the cargo thefts have spiked 15% across the US and Canada last year, meaning that people are going after the trucks for household goods, which was the biggest theft. Electronics was number 2, even food and beverages were number 3. So imagine the situation in the United States getting worse, right? I just talked about the situation with the inflation, where literally the cost of you to eat has gone up by 100%, essentially. And your salary's gone up, maybe 3-4%, unless you started some high side hustles. So what are people going to do? Well, they're just going to go out and steal the stuff that they need, or go and make money off of it, right? Because they're people feel desperate. And this kind of thing, I think, is going to get worse and worse, especially in bigger cities, one of the things, and I'll just skip ahead here, that's happening in New York, the illegal immigrants that are in New York are now taking up, the officials in New York, their offer to get bus tickets to Canada literally in the middle of the winter. So even the illegal immigrants now are tired of the filth and the crime and everything in New York City. And that kind of tells you a lot how the society as a whole is kind of degrading a little bit. January of this year had the most bankruptcies for companies since 2010. That's another indicator of things that are going on in the economy. And so much for billionaires, going after billionaires with a new 80,000 IRS agents. As remember, Biden talked about how he's going to go after the billionaires with all these new IRS agents. Now they're instituting a new procedure called Improve Tip Reporting Compliance. And I'm going to read this word for word. Part of the program, which wouldn't go into effect until after a month-long public comment period, IRS could withdraw liability protection related to rules that define tips as part of an employee's pay from employers that don't cooperate. So instead of going after billionaires, they're literally going after the people who receive the least amount of wages in the country. It kind of tells you the priorities. And one of the things that happens, if you didn't already realize it, you can't trust what the government says. The situation is that billionaires and these multi-billion-dollar companies have billions of dollars literally to deploy, and million-dollar accountants and million-dollar lawyers to defend themselves against an audit and to make sure they do things by the book and legally by offshoring and things like that to save money on taxes. But a waitress, for example, can't do that. That's why the real people that are going to be hurt by this new rule are going to be the people at the bottom, middle income and below. And there was a report that actually said as well that I remember a while ago that the majority of people who are audited are actually poor people, not rich people. The annual interest rate payment on the debt now is $850 billion in the collapse of the dollar news and rising fast. So I kind of want to put this into perspective because the federal budget right now for the 2023 fiscal year, which starts in October 1st of last year, is $5.8 trillion. There's a $1.2 trillion deficit essentially because the amount of money that the federal government gets is $4.6 trillion. So the amount of money that we are paying on the interest based on the money that we receive, not the total budget, but the money that we receive is 18.5%. So if that is continuing to rise and the annual payment that we're going to pay on our interest alone on the debt is going to be about $1 trillion, that's going to be 22% of the money that we receive. Now, federal deficit, which means that the money that we're missing to complete the budget or the money that we're borrowing went up by 8% in the first 4 months of the fiscal year, which means that the amount of money that is the shortfall for our budget or the amount of money that we're borrowing to cover the money that we're spending has gone up by 80% since October 1st. So even the U.S. military now still spends more money. The United States spends more money on the military than the next 9 countries combined. So we are really not in a good situation. And now we have a situation where there's a lot of other countries that are starting to realize what's happening. Ergo, what happened in 2022, where there's been a record number of gold purchases by central banks because people are starting to see maybe they're not going to pay this back, or the amount that they pay it back with is the value of the dollar is going to be a lot less because the dollar has essentially lost over 98% of its value since the 1920s, right? The 2-year and 10-year treasury yield have the widest inversion since 1981 on Thursday, indicating that we're walking into a recession. The inversion is continuing to accelerate, and desperate bank customers in Nigeria took off all their clothes and started to brawl in front of ATMs after the government replaced their banknotes, but unfortunately printed too few of them. Remember, Nigeria was one of the countries where they were limiting the amount of withdrawals that the government employees could take out of their bank at the ATMs to try to make use of the new digital currency or the government coin, which I call them. And in political news, Lula, which is the new communist president of Brazil, is saying that people can only receive financial aid until they have taken the thing in your arm, noting that Brazil plans to deploy their CBDC or their government coin next year. So imagine a world where they give you the money, which is all electronic, you can't save it, and you can't use it unless you have the thing in your arm. or whatever other, let's change it, or whatever other restriction they want to put. You ate too much meat, or you drove too much, you hurt the environment too much, right? This carbon footprint stuff. It's gonna get serious soon. Inflation rate in Argentina is already at 94% and supposedly supposed to increase as well this year. As good bread and circus governments do, their messiah in Lionel Messi, which won the World Cup, they're literally talking about putting the largest denominated bill of 10,000 with Messi's name on it, so everybody can enjoy the new bill that's worth a lot less in the future. You guys see how that works, right? And at least 50,000 people joined to protest on the streets of Copenhagen, which is the capital of Denmark. It's the biggest demonstration in over a decade due to the fact that they want to remove a holiday, a Christian holiday, to help finance and increase defense spending, which obviously has to do with the situation in Ukraine. I mentioned the situation with the illegal immigrants in New York. Vermont, the state of Vermont has doubled the number of fatal cardiac arrests in 2022 compared to the pre-pandemic average. I wonder what that could be. And the U.S. Supreme Court has struck down a ban on pot users owning gun rights. So that was ruled as unconstitutional. And it's official. There's a study from a university that said that ugly people are more likely to wear masks, whatever you want to take from that. And economic news, the UK indicated their growth rate was at 0 for 2024. So it looks like they're going to avoid a recession, but they're probably going to walk into one in 2023. Malaysia, which was the fastest growing economy in Asia in 2022 at 8.7%. It's the quickest pace that they've had in the last 2 decades. And the US Labor Department on Thursday said that the unemployment benefits has risen for the first time in the last 6 weeks went up by 13,000 to 196,000 by the week ending February 4th. In corporate news, Robinhood, I think Robinhood is a huge scam because of the front running that they do. They don't actually make money, in my view, ethically. They literally steal money out of you and I pockets. Your and I pockets is the way you say it, grammatically correct. They reported a $1 billion loss in 2022. Elon Musk officially won his shareholder suit after trial during the 2018 tweet where he said that he was going to take Tesla private for a certain amount of money. Speaking of companies that aren't feeling the recession, Starbucks had 8 of its 10 highest sales history days last quarter. And Credit Suisse, which is the Swiss bank dealing with a disaster, they went down 14.73% after they had a massive $7.3 billion loss in Swiss francs in 2022, a lot more that was expected. And in the last quarter, customers alone, they took out $100 billion. On to the layoffs. Alphabet, they lost not workers, but they lost $100 billion in market value after their I'm just going to chat. Their AI-powered search engine released incorrect information, so they lost $100 billion off of their stock price. Microsoft did see a boost now that they're saying that their search engine Bing is going to be powered by ChatGPT, which is good. And for the layoffs, Meta now is letting go 13% of its workforce already in November. First major layoff. Now they're telling a lot of managers and directors that they're going to have individual contributor jobs. So if they don't accept that, meaning that they're not going to have any more, they're not going to take charge of others, just going to go code and help design and research, they are just going to be let go if people don't opt for that. eBay is going to lay off 4% of its workers, Dell 5% at 6,600 people, Zoom is firing 15%, and Yahoo, who knew they still existed, is going to let go over 20% of its workforce, which is almost 9,000 people. Disney's going to let go 5% of their jobs, announcing a restructuring that's 7,000 workers, and Unilever, which is a huge consumer product company out of Europe, they are going to increase prices, or I should say continue to increase prices in the first half of the year as it looks to increase their gross margin. As I mentioned to you guys before, I think that a lot of these companies are abusing the inflation situation to be able to increase their prices more than they should, which obviously nobody's going to do anything about it, but just go out there and start trying to make more money. In technology, North American companies is struggling to hire workers. It's the tightest labor market in decades. So now North American companies have bought 11% more robots than before, which is a new record. So on top of artificial intelligence taking our jobs, the ones that are still going to be available, the robots are going to do. They spent money on over 44,000 robots in 2022, an 18% increase in the amount of money they spent, which is $2.4 billion. And also in technology, Italy is in the midst of a major internet outage. They have a 26% connection level compared to ordinary levels. And if you guys haven't been hearing a lot of these government bureaucrats and also the dedicated communist in chief Klaus Schwab from the WEF talking about the huge cyber attack that we're going to see around the world. So they're probably planning for it, in my view. Investment news, Thursday Turkey's stock market was shut down after the huge earthquakes. There's a picture that I'm going to show you here that the earth in Turkey literally moved 3 meters or about 10 feet, which is pretty eerie. Supposedly what's happening is, I don't know if you can see my hand there. Let me look at the video. Supposedly what's happening is that the whole African continent is actually shifting. And they didn't have one, but 2 earthquakes that were over 7. U.S. military officials on last Friday in international events spotted another Chinese balloon over Latin America. The Colombian military confirmed sighting an airborne object similar to a balloon, and the U.S. military shot down something that was coming over Alaska. And in one of the biggest disasters ever, the Chilean government is announcing an extension of the emergency order for the fires that they've been having. Temperatures have exceeded 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius. More than 1,100 people have sought refuge, while almost 1,000 people have been injured in the fires that they've been having. We're probably going to have a lot of those recently too. And in unusual facts this week, researchers in Japan uncover a 7.5-foot sword and a 16-foot wooden coffin. In meters, that's a 2.3 meter long sword. And the question is, what kind of person would be able to swing a almost 8-foot sword around? That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget, preppers were right.